Hello. So this is going to be my reactions to the discussion boards for Module 2 on um, copyright. Once again, I thought the discussion was really good. People are engaging and interacting with each other. Some people only have one comment up, and there is some repetition, but I was very impressed that really the three discussion boards were on different topics. So kudos to the discussion board leaders. I really liked that, and all the topics were good. And I thought that they worked out really nicely. I'm checking my clock a little bit. I have like three full pages of one page space notes. I'll be looking down at my notes a little bit to to refresh my memory. I'm probably going to have more than 15 minutes of comments, so I'm planning on making two videos, just so you should know. Um, Once again, on the comments, the more comments, the merrier. I'm very happy with the engagement. So this is obviously one of the really complicated issues, and what's really cool about this issue is it really brings into relief the key question that I'm trying to get at is how do these issues change as new media emerges? What goes on that makes them different? And this is so profound on what's happening with the reproduction and distribution of content. It's just amazing. So, as we know, that the right of copyright and also patents, for that matter, is in the um, Constitution. It was so important that they even put that right in the Constitution, copyright law. And the reason is that for that is, as you know, is because there's commercial value to the presentation, to the expression of ideas. And you want to incentivize people to engage in that and to incentivize it, say you have control over your expression of those ideas for X period of time. So you can't get away from um, thinking about the commercial value of ideas. But how far that extends is really up in the air. Now, when you think about this, copyright really came into fore in the 1600s when you could start mass reproducing material. When you had to handwrite a um, treatise, a book, a script, a manuscript, whatever, and you got one or two or three copies, that was the worth of a lifetime. They were always shared. The books, by and large, were stationary in places and they were always shared and the owner owned. Once you start being reproduced, and then this idea that there's this commercial value to the expression of ideas starts to take place. And as we know, also copyright was from the very beginning an instrument of control. We didn't really talk that much about it as an instrument of control, but it was also an instrument of control that you had to register your copyright with the government. And we'll talk more about that when we get up to censorship, which is a more overt instrument of control. That said, it is the change in technology and the ease with which people can reproduce content and distribute content that's really put the stress and pressure on copyright. And that's put the stress and pressure on copyright from the beginning. But certainly with reproduction in non tangible media, i.e., as electronic media, has cranked that up a lot. But there's three players, and I want to just clarify on this that there's three players involved here. There's the content producer, we all got that. There's the content consumer, we got that. And then there's the content distributor, and that has gotten really crazy. And so, really, with broadcast and radio, the distributor a lot of times, CBS, owned the copyright. They would buy the show and own the show and get, or sometimes the show creator owns the copyright to the show, owns the show, and that's why they would make money a lot of times for in certain years. And the business model in television changes a lot, but certain times the first run model, the show creator made very little money except in salary and that kind of thing, but made a lot of money in reruns, and that's really where it was. Now, in terms of distribution, we've seen now that there's two real big forms of distribution, and I thought Daniel's link to that Facebook video was really fantastic because it really laid out the a bunch of the issues on how muddled and complex this is. So right now there's two really kinds of distributors. There's the streaming services, Netflix, Spotify, Pandora, etc., etc. And there's the free distributors, which is Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, those. And then there's sort of hybrids or different sort of um, conglomerations. But there's a lot of tension between who has the power and who makes the money. So one of the tensions between music producers and Spotify or iTunes is that iTunes and the producers make a lot more money than the artists make. Now, one of the really interesting things, and we know, and prior to that, with Napster, of course, this was all free sharing going on, and so that was complex. One of the really interesting things that people raised is, well, maybe more complex set of rights. This, I think, was Matt talking of photography and elsewhere, and some of the photography consumers were talking about that as well. That maybe you need more set of rights sort of to go on. And basically, that's right now on demand. That's the difference between buy and rent. You're buying a separate set of rights. But maybe there's sharing, different sorts of sharing rights that are going on. And that's one of the efforts by Creative Commons. One of their goals is to have those sort of rights more complex, rather than I have the copyright, I don't have the copyright, I've sold you use, I haven't sold you use. And that's an interesting idea, and that's where the Creative Commons really comes into play in a pretty major way. That said, another really interesting point is we talked about that and a lot of people talked about that there's a commercial concept to this, but there's other issues at play here. First, there's the expressive or the communicative aspect, and a lot of people said, man, if I had something that would go viral, I would be happy and I don't need the credit and I'm not doing the credit. People want to reach an audience. That's why all of us, not all of us, but that's why some of us, that's why I'm on Twitter, give myself the illusion of 506 people that I could spout off to. By the way, if you're not following me, Elliot King at Elliot King PhD, please do. We've talked about this, the incentive to create. I can create because either make money or reach audience or that kind of thing. Protect the incentive to create. Protect that incentive to create is significant. And then there's the element of control. Who has control? And that's another thing for those of us who are creative people. A lot of times you're hired on work per hire. You do something and the buyer retains all the control. And I thought about that as people talked about their companies buying these certain rights, the wedding photography from Matt and that kind of thing. All these plays, commercial impact, control. A lot of what I create has very little commercial impact. Nonetheless, it's still an issue of control. We're selling it, all the books I've written and that kind of thing, and to give that incentive. And then although we want to communicate, there's a lot of business models that if you give away the control of your content, you collapse. And one of the things that's happening right now is uh, very difficult is with newspapers. Now, there was a court case back in the 1920s that you, on the one hand, obviously can't copyright the news, a news event, but on the other hand, you can copyright news stories that people can't take that verbatim. But now we have with linking, and there was a copyright case. Is linking a violation of copyright? And the answer to that is no. Linking is not. But people are pointing to newspaper stories and newspaper reporting, and newspapers still do the overwhelming majority of reporting in this country. But there's and their views and they're shared and that kind of thing. But um, they don't have a business model that's supporting that level of reporting at all. Um, and that's a problem, and that's an issue that has to be addressed. Another really interesting issue that came up, which I thought was very important you want to think about, is the different traditions in different form of media. So for example, as people rightly noted out in plagiarism, in print, there's not only copyright, there's plagiarism. So if you plagiarize or if I plagiarize something, I'm going to have a sanction not only because I violated somebody's copyright, but I plagiarized something as well. Morgan brought up, and by the way, I'm mentioning some people's names. I've read every single post, so if I don't mention your name, I'm trying not to get into that everybody feels, oh, if I didn't mention your name, I didn't read your post. I'm reading everybody's post, and I'm liking the interactions that are going on in this post. I feel very, very satisfied with them. But in print, if you use other people's content, not only is a copyright violation, it's plagiarism. In music, that's called sampling. It's a whole different kind of world going on there. It's not nearly as um, clear cut. It's not nearly as clear cut as it is in print. I think in the visual arts, I want to say maybe it's harder to sample, but there's been artists like Rauschenberg, collagists, and stuff like that. They use a lot of other stuff. And then there's Andy Warhol with photorealism and that kind of thing. So it gets really, really, really complex. And then Morgan, I'll go back to Morgan. I skipped over what I want to say, what she said about the Instagram artist who would then embellish the Instagram images in some way and sell them for a lot of money because they had been transformed enough. And that's one of the concepts is what you've done to the raw material transformative enough that it's no longer copyrightable. By the way, when I taught this class 2 years ago, somebody did tweeted about this guy, and they got back a very, very, very snarky tweet, which is very interesting. And then also, Morgan brought up, you know, the rules that govern the use of um, plays and community theater and the reproduction of plays, and the friend that's posting little slips. So that's 14 minutes. I'm going to stop here and I'll do another one.